Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to today's webinar about sustainable supply chain management in partnership with Scale for ClimateTech and NextCore. My name is Jillian Griffin, and I am the program manager for the Sustainable Supply Chain Program at the New York State Pollution Prevention Institute. Today, I'll start by telling you a bit about our organization more broadly, and then I'll discuss what supply chain sustainability means, provide some examples of previous projects we've conducted, and talk about ways we may be able to help support your business. Next slide. So for the last 17 years, the Rochester Institute of Technology has led a program for the state of New York called the New York State Pollution Prevention Institute, or P2I, as we like to call it. P2I provides businesses with practical tools and solutions they need to realize the benefits of sustainability, not just for their company, but for our economy, environment, and society as a whole. Our team of engineers and sustainability specialists know firsthand the practical challenges facing organizations that want to become more sustainable. And that's why we are able to offer customized solutions and educational resources that deliver on results and budget. We have an annual budget of about $4.3 million, which is funded by New York State's Environmental Protection Fund. And we have several program areas that provide New York State businesses, communities, and nonprofits with practical tools and solutions to realize the benefits of sustainability. And these include sustainable manufacturing assessments, supply chain sustainability, which we'll be discussing today, technology commercialization, food waste diversion, life cycle assessment, emerging contaminants and green chemistry, and our small business environmental assistance program, which helps out with meeting air emissions regulations. Next slide. P2I partners with 5 research universities, including RIT, Clarkson, SUNY Binghamton, Rensselaer Polytechnic, and the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at Cornell University. And we also partner with New York's 11 manufacturing extension partnerships, or MEPs, such as NextCore. And we do that in order to deliver practical results-focused outcomes for our clients. Before I go any further today, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Carpenter. Chris is the Marketing and Community Relations Manager of the Climate Tech programs at NextCore, and he's going to say just a few words about Scale for Climate Tech and NextCore.
Thanks, Jillian. Yes, so couldn't have said it better. There's kind of 2 programs here today. Again, I work on the marketing side of a lot of the climate tech programs and for NextCore in general. We have a lot of our team on the call here, but we work closely with Jillian and New York State P2I to provide manufacturing support and different environmental evaluations and kind of consulting. So Scale for ClimateTech, Scale for ClimateTech is in general, it's an accelerator to help growth stage innovators bolster their manufacturing. Essentially, it's to kind of help folks to take a product that's helping out with a climate solution and help it to go from pilot to mass production. The whole idea is kind of to de-risk the whole manufacturing landscape. Obviously, it's a giant challenge, so we have a couple of teams that participate. We administer this in partnership with Second Muse. They're a B Corp down in New York City, and we're supported by NYS. One of the things that we are working on is a supply chain partner database. So this QR code, it's also linked, and when we send the deck out later, if you're a manufacturer interested in participating or being a part of the database, it more or less as we work with teams and try to find a good manufacturing fit for them in New York, this form kind of helps us sort out all that info. So this is a general info form. Give it a scan and let us know. And then, as Jillian mentioned, we are NextCore is the MEP for the Finger Lakes region. It's there's a lot of things included in it. But in general, it's supporting manufacturers, small to medium-sized manufacturers who are trying to grow kind of like top and bottom line parts of their business. So it can be like advising, making connections. A lot of times we work really closely with RIT between their COE and the GIS there, and also access to grants. This is from an old deck because I know there's a couple of grants here that are no longer available, but as grants become available, we help facilitate that. That's kind of how we got involved with New York State P2I, is help working towards sustainable manufacturing. And at this point, I will turn the show back over to Jillian, who is thankfully doing a lot of this presentation. So thank you for all your time. And I will turn off my camera now, but I'll be in the chat if anybody has any questions or comments. So, all right, take it away, Jillian.
Great, thanks, Chris. Much appreciated. And speaking of the chat, if you have questions or comments throughout the presentation, feel free to put them there in the chat, and we should have some time at the end for Q&A. All right, so we'll get going. The next thing I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about working with P2I. First and foremost, there's no cost for getting in touch with us to see if we can help. Our free initial screening includes a preliminary discussion to learn about your needs and situation. If needed, we may make a site visit to assist with our understanding. That would also be at no charge. And one thing I just want to underline is, although we do have some cost, we really exist to help New York State manufacturers and some other organizations reduce their environmental footprints. So we are here to serve you. So as I'm talking about different things like cost and how to work with us, keep that in mind. Some of the many business benefits of P2I project support could include access to industry experienced engineers, technicians, and environmental scientists, cost savings through more efficient resource use, higher job retention rates, opportunities for job creation, reduced waste generation, and more. With that said, there is one primary requirement for working with P2I, and that is that you must be a New York-based company, meaning that your business must be registered in New York State. In terms of some of the practicalities of working with us, the cost of a typical project ranges from $15,000 to $75,000, depending on the project type and scope. However, through that funding I mentioned, provided by the state, P2I can offset most of the project cost. Companies are typically responsible for just a small cost share. In most cases, for a first project, that amount is 10%. Most projects take between 3 and 9 months to complete, and we do also require post-project reporting for 3 years. This allows us to compile important metrics about our impact to kind of keep us honest and make sure that we are having the impact that is intended. Next slide. Before we go too much further, I'd like to ask you to participate in a quick poll. You can use your smartphone to scan the QR code and respond. Just interested in learning if your company currently has any sustainability initiatives in place. So I'll give that a minute and then we'll move forward. Starting to get some responses. Thank you for that. Give this just another minute. All right. Looks like we have a pretty relatively even distribution here. Um, The one quick note, the poll does stay open, so if you need a little more time, feel free to respond as you can. This is just helpful for me to get a sense of where people might be coming from. Looks like the majority of the respondents, at least, um, have either started implementation, have something underway, or are planning to within the next 12 months. So that's great. Thanks everyone for participating, and we'll move to the next slide. Okay, I'm going to focus now on the sustainability supply chain program at P2I. It is designed to help clients better manage supply chain related risk and to increase stakeholder value and brand loyalty. So, some of the kinds of projects that we do to accomplish that include supply chain assessments and sustainability plans, preparation support for certifications and eco labels. So, that could be something like ISO 14001, B Corp, etc. Guidance on sustainability scorecards and questionnaires, which you may receive from your customers, sustainable supplier program development, zero waste to landfill assessments, and organizational greenhouse gas emissions footprinting. Next slide. Over the next few slides, I'll talk about just what is supply chain sustainability. To start with, supply chain sustainability can be defined as using environmentally, socially, and economically sustainable practices to create value while minimizing negative impacts to society and the environment. In other words, supply chain sustainability aims to grow long-term environmental, social, and economic value for all stakeholders involved in bringing products and services to market. From an environmental standpoint, which is our focus, that means things like reducing pollution, conserving resources, mitigating climate change, and minimizing the carbon footprint of a company's operations. From a social standpoint, that means things like integrating fair labor practices, safe working conditions, ethical sourcing, and being attuned to human rights concerns across the supply chain. From an economic standpoint, that means creating long-term value for stakeholders, promoting responsible business practices, and fostering a sustainable and resilient supply chain. To give you a better sense of what that looks like, some sustainable supply chain best practices include using supplier codes of conduct, waste reduction, stakeholder engagement, reporting and transparencies, and really any other actions that are intended to protect the environment from harm caused by various supply chain activities, which could range from, manufacturing and production to storage, packaging, transportation and distribution, etc. Next slide. Sustainable supply chain practices apply to all stages of the supply chain, whether that is extraction of raw materials, the manufacturing process itself, sales and distribution, use, or even end of use. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of those stages and what they mean. In the raw material stage, sustainable supply chain practices include prioritizing suppliers with ethical labor practices, choosing materials that are renewable, recyclable, or have a lower environmental impact, and ensuring the traceability of raw materials. In the manufacturing stage, sustainable supply chain practices include use of energy efficient technologies and processes, waste minimization, optimization of water usage, and wastewater treatment. In the sales and distribution stage, practices include use of environmentally friendly transportation options, route optimization to reduce fuel consumption and emissions, the use of sustainable packaging materials, and the optimization of packaging to reduce waste and shipping costs. In the use stage, sustainable supply chain practices can include designing products for durability and longevity, designing for recyclability or reuse, and educating end users about responsible disposal at end of life. Then finally, in the end of use stage, sustainable supply chain practices include recycling and product take-back programs, waste minimization through product design and manufacturing processes, and ensuring the responsible disposal of products when they are no longer useful. Next slide. This busy diagram is meant to help illustrate the sources of environmental impact at each stage of the supply chain and how they're related to the broader supply chain. So, for example, resource extraction generates wastewater, air emissions, and other wastes. Energy consumption by manufacturers generates air emissions, and consumers generate waste and pollution during the use phase of a product and at end of life, unless products have been designed for recycling, refurbishment, or reuse. On the left-hand side, you can see some basic inputs, including raw materials, energy, water, packaging, and transportation. Decisions about each one of these inputs impact the sustainability of the supply chain and represent opportunities to add value to the bottom line. So, for example, choosing materials that are renewable, recyclable, or have lower environmental impact can reduce carbon emissions and costs related to waste disposal and waste treatment. Energy and water conservation reduce costs and carbon emissions. Choosing packaging materials that are renewable, recyclable, and right-sized, in other words, using only the amount of packaging needed, reduces material costs and carbon emissions. Different transportation options have different impacts on carbon emissions. So you start to kind of get the idea. Sources of environmental impact in the use and distribution stage include suppliers, manufacturers, and consumers. And so naturally, supplier practices will directly affect a company's sustainability by influencing some of those environmental, social, and economic outcomes of production. So, for example, supplier practices could um, include sustainably sourced products, or they could be made with toxic chemicals and cheap labor. Um, Practices could enable or hinder your company's ability to be transparent about the origins of materials and goods. And these practices could expose or insulate your company against reputational and legal risks. In terms of manufacturers, practices and decisions impacting sustainability include using inputs manufactured in a plant running on clean energy versus one running off the grid, which may be powered by things like coal and oil. Using inputs manufactured in a plant with unfair wages and unsafe working conditions versus one that compensates employees with a living wage, provides training, and properly maintains buildings and equipment. Using inputs manufactured in a plant with compliance violations that can cause delays and increased costs due to fines and lost work time versus a plant that is ISO 14001 certified and compliant. In terms of consumer practices impacting sustainability, energy consumption during the use phase of a product or service, which contributes to air and carbon emissions, and waste generation at end of life. In terms of outputs, the outputs are themselves environmental impacts. So, for example, wastewater from manufacturing operations, air emissions from resource extraction, manufacturing, transportation, and use phase, and all other waste. So, whether it's solid, hazardous, non-hazardous, liquid, etc., coming from resource extraction, manufacturing, transportation, or use phase. And taken together, the impacts of each stage of the supply chain ultimately affect generations environmentally, socially, and economically. Next slide. So you've heard a lot about what sustainable supply chain is. Now I'd like to talk about why it's important to your business, why you should care. First, companies are facing increased pressure to have a better understanding of their supply chain. So, for example, customers are demanding more sustainable products and practices. Commodity prices and natural resource scarcity are on the rise, and stakeholders are requiring more transparency, whether that's investors, consumers, customers, et cetera. Second, supply chain programs add tangible value to a company's bottom line, and that can take the form of revenue growth. So by strengthening your sustainable value proposition with your customers, it could take the form of brand reputation, and help out with customer retention and new customer acquisition. It could take the form of cost reduction, by helping identify and unlock new opportunities for savings. And it could take the form of risk mitigation, for example, contingency planning for your supplier network. Next slide. The top areas of supply chain risk from an environmental sustainability perspective include energy use, carbon or greenhouse gas emissions, waste generation, and water consumption. And a lot of these are going to have similar impacts. So, for example, energy consumption impact is going to look like cost and pollution. So, if you think of carbon emissions as a problem, a solution is to source clean or cleaner energy. If you think about lack of energy efficiency and conservation as a problem, can optimize systems and processes throughout your supply chain. GHG emissions also takes the form, of course, of pollution, but also climate change. So, solution there is focused on decarbonization or electrification. Waste impact, again, cost and pollution. There are many solutions to emissions and groundwater and air discharge that could be source reduction, so using efficient processes, using material effectively, could be designing for recycling, making products with longer life cycles, making them easy to disassemble, recycle, and reuse. Um, Circular economy is another solution, which involves reintroducing waste into the production cycle as a new resource. We've mentioned returnable or reusable packaging, so that packaging can be used multiple times before disposing of it, and inventory management, so minimizing excess stock and improving demand forecasting. Water consumption impact takes the form primarily of cost, aside from just resource scarcity. Um, so through efficient processes, recycling and reuse of water can mitigate that impact. Similarly, with water treatment, there are ways to reduce use of chemicals and toxins in the manufacturing and related processes that make the wastewater less harmful, but can also make it reusable in some cases. Well, all four of these elements are critically important. The one that dominates the conversation is often GHG emissions because of its connection to climate change. So, whether driven by the Paris Climate Accord or recent European reporting and disclosure requirements, demand for action on GHG emissions and climate change is coming from customers, suppliers, investors, and consumers. These are all reasons for pursuing sustainable supply chain. Right, next slide. We'll pause once more for another poll question. Just interested in knowing if your company has calculated its carbon footprint or has any equal labels or certifications. Again, you can just scan the QR code to respond. Give you a minute to do that. Get a couple of responses. All right, so far seeing pretty equal distribution. So far, people seem to know what a carbon footprint is, so that's great. We will move on to our next slide, please, Chris. When it comes to the business case for sustainable supply chain, there are internal and external drivers, which I'll talk about. Internal drivers focus on risk and efficiency. Sustainable supply chain practices can help minimize business disruption, protect company reputation, and lead to greater access to capital, financing, and insurance because of mitigated risk. For example, understanding the origin of your input materials enables you to choose suppliers that use sustainable practices to manufacture the goods that you need to create your products. And doing so can help avoid business disruption due to things like material shortages, increased costs, and production delays caused by supplier instability. Also offers some insulation against reputational damage in the case of a supplier using practices like clear cutting, improper disposal of wastewater, unsafe working conditions. A common example is, I think it was in Bangladesh, there was a sweatshop factory. The building literally collapsed. Definitely not good for business continuity or your reputation. Sustainable supply chain practices also lead to operational efficiencies, such as cost reduction, productivity increases, and strategic supplier relationships. For example, creating strategic supplier relationships can shift the dynamic from a transactional one to a collaborative one with mutually beneficial terms that drive, again, increased efficiency, innovation, and long-term success. This can be particularly true in the case of pursuing goals. If the supplier and buyer are aligned on, for example, a goal of reducing transportation methods, they can partner to optimize delivery schedules, volumes, and methods, all of which can also increase cost and operational efficiency. Next slide. External drivers of sustainable supply chains include the need to meet evolving customer and stakeholder requirements, access new markets, increase pricing power, and improve customer loyalty. These goals can often be achieved through sustainable processes and products. Examples include the use of renewable energy, energy consumption reduction, efficient resource use, use of renewable materials, designing durable and repairable products, and using sustainable packaging. Additional external drivers include the need to attract and retain top talent, build strong stakeholder relationships, and secure greater access to capital. This can be done in part by building a culture of responsibility, which is characterized by accountability, transparency, and corporate social responsibility, among other things. A sustainable supply chain is fundamental to a culture of responsibility because it includes many of the practices that help maintain it. So, examples include supplier audits, supplier relationship management, increased transparency and traceability, and sustainability goals and commitments like emissions reduction, waste reduction, or the use of sustainable inputs. Um, all right, I'm gonna give about 15 seconds here for anybody else to scan that QR code. So just looking to understand if you've received requests from customers to complete things like sustainability scorecards, questionnaires, expectations, that kind of thing. Getting some responses. Okay, great. Let's go to the next slide, please, Chris. All right, so here at P2I, there's several ways that we can support your sustainable supply chain goals and efforts. These include sustainable supply chain assessments, third-party certification support. So again, things like ISO 14001, zero waste to landfill, B Corp, et cetera. Zero waste to landfill assessments, organizational carbon footprinting, and guidance on customer scorecard and questionnaire design and responses. Next slide. Over the next handful of slides, I'll talk about projects with topics including ISO 14001, customer scorecard responses, supply chain sustainability assessment, and zero waste. There are case studies for these and many other projects available on our website if you'd like to learn more. And there is a link to our website at the end of this presentation. So the first project that I'd like to talk about was conducted for a company in Western New York called Cartesis. Cartesis is a global metal finishing manufacturer that supports the auto industry. For this project, Cartesis was getting pressure from some of its customers to implement an ISO 14001 environmental management system. So P2I's role was to review and assess Cartese's processes and activities to determine how close or far the company was from conformance to that ISO standard. And we did this by reviewing existing policies, procedures, and other documentation, and comparing that information to the various clauses or requirements of the ISO 14001 standard, which, if you're familiar, would include things like context of the organization, environmental policy, planning, and improvement. We also conducted an on-site assessment to supplement the initial findings from the desk review. So then, having gathered all this information, we then developed documentation to clearly identify gaps and support Cartesis in their support of ISO 14001 conformance. And this specifically included a SWOT analysis for interested parties, process flow diagrams, input-output diagrams for major operations, an environmental aspect chart, including risk analysis, analysis of environmental impacts, and an internal audit checklist. So upon completion of this project, Cartesis was then provided with basically all the information and guidance that they needed to reach compliance with ISO 14001. Next slide. The next project I'd like to talk about was conducted for another Western New York company. In this case, the client was Upstate Niagara Cooperative, which is one of the nation's top farmer-owned dairy cooperatives. Upstate Niagara was receiving requests from global customers to report on sustainability and environmental efforts, recognizing an opportunity to maintain and gain competitive positioning by being a differentiated supplier through its sustainability commitments. Upstate Niagara approached P2I for help establishing an environmental management system that would enable them to track and report carbon emissions and set goals for things like reducing energy consumption, water use, and waste generation. So for this project, to assist Upstate Niagara, we reviewed manufacturing operations, we engaged top management, conducted assessments at 5 different manufacturing facilities, and completed some benchmarking. And all of this work made it possible to identify the needed elements for an environmental management system at Upstate Niagara, to provide guidance on meeting specific environmental goals required by global customers, to provide guidance on establishing an environmental management system, and to provide guidance on reducing environmental impacts, which again included energy, greenhouse gas emissions, water use, and waste generation, the same 4 that we keep hearing over and over. As a result of the work performed by P2I, a substantial amount of documentation analysis was completed. Um, and similar to the Cartesis project, this included process flow diagrams showing environmental aspects, input-output diagrams for environmental impacts, and an environmental risk analysis for significance determination, also some data analysis for establishing objectives and targets, a gap assessment, and some tools and guidelines to help Upstate Niagara actually respond to the requests from their customers that were driving the project to begin with, and hopefully attract additional customers. Next slide. Just a quick blurb. We received a nice testimonial from Upstate Niagara indicating the value of the knowledge and resources that we provided throughout the project. Always good to hear that from our clients. Next slide. The third project I'd like to discuss is a sustainability assessment for Sweetworks Confections. Located in Cheektowaga, New York, Sweetworks is a chocolate manufacturer and subsidiary of a Swiss-based chocolate maker called Fry, which itself is a subsidiary of a large multinational company called Migros. As a subsidiary, Sweetworks was tasked with determining their current sustainability status and evaluating that performance relative to that of Fry and the parent company Migros. The Sweetworks was also required to evaluate the necessity of an environmental management system such as ISO 14001. So kind of similar to the previous projects, we conducted a review of existing processes, procedures, and environmental data from Sweetworks. That included electricity and natural gas consumption, refrigerant loss, water consumption, waste generation, and greenhouse gas emissions. And the result of this work was a sustainability baseline showing environmental performance, um, an environmental management gap assessment, so a determination of how close or far SweetWorks was to ISO 14001 conformance given their current operating procedures and policies. Also, a set of opportunities for achieving conformance with the requirements of their parent companies, and a sustainability plan, which included a 2-year roadmap for improvement. We also conducted benchmarking to identify best practices that could be beneficial to SweetWorks goals and those of its stakeholders, such as its parent companies. One of the tools that we use for this project, and that we use for many projects, is the sustainability management cycle, which follows principles similar to Plan, Do, Check, Act, and DMAIC. The major phases of that cycle are define and commit, measure and assess, analyze and improve, communicate and report, and implement improvements. So there's a lot of focus here on continuous improvement. Next slide. Fortunate again to get a nice testimonial from SweetWorks, indicating our ability to quickly get up to speed with the complex relationships, policies, and processes between SweetWorks, Fry, and Migros. So we appreciated that. Next slide. The fourth and final case study that I'd like to share with you is a zero waste to landfill project that we conducted for a company called BeechNut. Located in Amsterdam, New York, BeechNut is a baby and toddler food manufacturing company that was interested in developing a zero waste program to improve its diversion rate and identify waste reduction best practices. So we took several actions to develop a strategy for BeechNut. The first was to analyze BeechNut's waste generation processes, composition, pathways, and data. Um, we also evaluated our preliminary findings against their targeted diversion rate of 90% and identified gaps between a particular zero waste to landfill standard called TRUE and BeechNut's then current waste related processes and procedures. And then the final step was to develop a sustainable waste reduction plan to support, again, their efforts to reach 90% diversion. The plan included a zero waste definition, a waste diversion baseline, opportunities for increasing waste diversion, and waste reduction goals and targets. In addition, we put together a training on zero waste to landfill, which was provided to BeechNut employees involved in waste generation and management. Next slide. This slide shows an example of a key output from a typical zero waste to landfill project. This is from BeechNut in this case. Zero waste opportunities are often organized into what's known as the zero waste hierarchy, which includes the diversion pathways listed. The diagram on the right depicts opportunities for improvement by diversion pathway and gives an indication of the relative impact of each opportunity as well as the time required to implement. The diversion pathways are also shown in order of most to least preferred, with something called rethink redesign being most preferable and landfill being least preferable. The rethink redesign pathway is most preferable because it focuses on using systems and processes to prevent waste rather than focusing on waste after it's already been generated. So, for example, reviewing purchasing records and supply chain agreements to find ways to design out or eliminate waste from vendors. In this example, a solution could involve requiring vendors to take back packaging or to use less wasteful or recyclable options. Next slide. All right, we've covered a lot of ground today, so I'd like to recap with some key takeaways. The first of these is that supply chain risk occurs at every stage of a product's life cycle. Risks range from climate change and pollution to lack of transparency and non-compliance with regulations. Second, sustainable supply chain practices can help mitigate that risk by providing transparency, minimizing impact on the environment, using resources efficiently, reducing cost, and adding long-term value. Impacts of a sustainable supply chain can include things like building trust, enhancing brand reputation, and improving decision making, as well as reducing carbon emissions, minimizing waste, adopting circular economy principles, realizing cost reductions through resource optimization, and ultimately gaining a stronger, more competitive position in the marketplace. Finally, P2I can help you implement and leverage sustainable supply chain strategies to help manage risk and increase stakeholder value and brand loyalty. Um, Next slide. So before we open up things for Q&A, I want to talk briefly about some additional resources available to you. Next slide. Some of you may know P2I falls under the broader umbrella of the Golisano Institute for Sustainability at RIT. We are an applied research center and degree granting unit. Research focuses on the modern industrial economy, so that includes energy, manufacturing, transportation, and the built environment. There are two sides to GIS, one academic and one industry facing. The industry facing side works exclusively with industrial and large government sponsors. There are probably 100 or so companies and industry cluster projects each year to improve products and production processes. And similar to P2I, the industry side is staffed with full-time engineers and technical people who don't have academic responsibilities. So what we do is work on company-defined problems that result in some sort of practical knowledge that can be implemented now. Next slide. The specific industry-facing programs at GIS include P2I, which we've talked a lot about, but also the Center of Excellence in Advanced and Sustainable Manufacturing, also known as COE. Both programs have state funding to substantially offset the project costs. COE differs from P2I in that it focuses much more on product design and development assistance, as well as manufacturing technology implementation. Next slide. I also want to call out another program within P2I, which is our direct assistance program that provides sustainable manufacturing assessments. So those include things like eliminating toxic solvents, reducing hazardous waste, reducing the use of hazardous treatment chemicals, and lowering waste use and subsequent wastewater discharge. Some examples of project work in this area include a sector-based project to eliminate PFAS and metal finishing, coolant management system filtration improvement to remove hazardous particulate, assessment of source reduction and water closed loop opportunities in manufacturing, elimination of trichloroethylene and subsequent transition to an aqueous part cleaning operation, increasing efficiencies in cleaning, plating, and air compressor operations. And one project we like to point out, we created a water map of a facility and determined where water could be filtered for reuse. And this resulted in the savings of over 36,000 gallons of water per day, which was roughly equivalent to almost $200,000 a year. Next slide. Just one last question here. For future programming, we're interested in which sustainability programs you'd like to see more about. We've got a couple of different options there. Thanks again to everyone who has participated in the poll. It's really helpful. All right, and then we will go to the next slide. If you're interested in learning more about sustainable supply chain assistance or any other programs at P2I or COE, please reach out to me. You can also check out our website to learn more about our work and resources, which include case studies, fact sheets, interactive tools, and much more. As a reminder, there's no cost for getting in touch with us to see if we can help. Our free initial screening also includes a preliminary discussion to learn about your needs and your particular situation, and may include a site visit if needed. We'd love to have a conversation with you and see if we can connect on an improvement project for you. And with that, we'll go to the last slide. And I will just thank you very much for your time, your attention. And if anyone has any questions or comments, you can put them in chat or feel free to reach out to me directly after this webinar.
Thank you so much, Jillian. That was just a fire hose of information. So thank you.
Yeah.
So while we're so yeah, folks, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat or the Q&A feature, whichever is easier. Just to kind of kick things off, so is the best way, Jill, to get involved with New York State P2I just to reach out directly to your contact information here, or how would someone kick that off, Jillian?
Yeah, that would be your direct line. Reach out to me. And even if you're interested in something that isn't sustainable supply chain, I certainly know all of the different program managers, so I can connect you wherever you need to go. Just drop me a quick note, and I'm more than happy to do that or help you figure out where you need to be.
Fantastic. And is there a I know you've done projects with a bunch of different companies, and like at NextCore, for some of our manufacturers we help out, it's like I think it's like 500 employees or smaller. Do you all
Mhm.
have limitations on like a group that you would work with? Any like
We
that?
don't. We tend to work primarily with small and medium-sized businesses, but we've also worked with Fortune 500 companies. So
Nice.
we are happy to help any company that's registered to do business in New York State.
Amazing. Yeah, your guys' work is no matter what corner of New York I'm in, I've found a project I feel like you guys have touched. Um, so we'll give it a little longer. See if I don't see any questions yet. I'm sure people
It
are.
was a ton of information, so I can imagine if your head's spinning a little bit.
Yeah, we'll give a
Definitely,
couple minutes. We are working to send out all this info. So if you feel like you didn't write something down or you missed it, we're going to try to get this recording up ASAP and cut out the part where I messed up all the slides. So thank you everybody for your patience on that, and then get the deck out as well. Um, yeah. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it. I don't see any
Okay.
questions, any comments. Jillian, thanks so much for leading the charge on this and sharing everything. Everyone who tuned in today, thanks for taking the time. I hope everyone gets an opportunity to get outside today, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Take it easy.